All right, I will say good morning. My apologies about that. We have some technical difficulties this morning, but let us begin. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors for today's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Semi and Malka Esterson for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak, Laib, ben Aharon, HaKohen, Sarah, Rachel, bas Baruch, Avraham, and Hinda, bas Henech, Efraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the shiurim this week in memory of Paul's sister, Zachrini Shulamis, bas Shmuel. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today. Our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Mr. and Mrs. Yehudah Buchwalter, in memory of all that was lost on Kristallnacht and the deliverances that Hashem gave us that day. Such a beautiful and meaningful and uplifting sponsorship. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Klal Yisrael will only see Yeshuas and Nechamas. And also with that, let us begin. So today's Daf is Lamed Beis. We have a lot to do today. We are picking up, 32, we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. And we left off in the third, in the wide lines on the bottom, the third wide line. So we'll say, remember again, the Gemara is talking about the 9 enactments of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So in yesterday's daf, we were successfully able to identify 8 of them, and there's a machlokes about the 9th. The machlokes was between Rav Papa and Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Rav Papa said the 9th takana was what we call kerem revai, or more specifically, the repealing of the takana of kerem revai. Right? So remember again that they used to have a takana that if you were within 1 day journey of Yerushalayim, you had to bring your kerem revai to Yerushalayim. After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai repealed that particular enactment. Now we come to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, no, the 9th enactment was the Lashon Shel Zahoris, the red wool. What's the red wool? So here we go, boss. Say third wide line. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Lashon Shel Zahoris, he says that's the 9th takana. What's the case? The Sanyo. Barishona hayu koshin Lashon Shel Zahoris al Pesach ulami b'chutz. Let's remember again this Gemara from Yuma, very beautiful Gemara. It used to be that on Yom Kippur they would hang up a piece of red wool at the entranceway of the ulam. Remember again, the ulam is the antechamber, the large rectangular structure that leads into the Kodesh, right? It's the hallway, the antechamber to the Kodesh itself. So all of Klal Yisrael is assembled on Yom Kippur. And remember again, the individual, the Ish Iti, would take the Seir La'azazel, the goat, into the wilderness. It was his job to throw the goat off the cliff to effect atonement for Klal Yisrael. So they used to hang a piece of red string by the entranceway of the Ulam. Again, remember, what was the point of that red string? That was the litmus test of divine forgiveness. So the Gemara says, Hilbin, hayusmechin. If it turned white, everyone was obviously very joyous. Lo hilbin, if it didn't turn white, hayu atzavin, they were very sad. So therefore, again, hiskinu shikoshin also pesach olim bifnim. Shmuel said, this is incredible. So they instituted, listen to this Gemara. We know this already. They instituted, therefore, that they should move the red string from the outside to the inside. Right? Let's analyze. What was the problem here? The problem was that if the string didn't turn white, it remained red. What did that symbolize? What does that symbolize? Lack of forgiveness. So the rabbi said, you know what? People are getting too sad. So let's instead move the string to the inside. The rabbi said, isn't that fascinating? You would think that if the string doesn't turn white, then what? You want people to see that. See, the rabbi said, what you see here is something absolutely amazing. That sometimes you want people to be abundantly aware of the truth, and sometimes you need people to maintain a sense of hope and optimism, even in the face of difficult circumstances. You see, what the rabbis understood was that to see that string remain red on Yom Kippur would be totally demoralizing. And when people become demoralized enough, they simply stop trying. So can you imagine all of Klal Yisrael is packed into the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur, remember again, is a day of simcha, a day of joy, a day of forgiveness. It's a new start. It's a tabla rasa. That's the blank slate. And what happens, again, if that string remains red? So everybody stops trying. B'pashtos, everybody stops davening. Everything comes to a screeching halt. So isn't it interesting that sometimes it's perhaps better not to know the full truth so that you could be able to go ahead and maintain a certain sense of hope and optimism rather than be faced with the clear, unequivocal truth and lose your drive for any future focus. It's an incredible yisod. Now, of course, sometimes it's reverse true, so sometimes knowing the truth, it's almost as if a person is battling an illness, right? So the worst thing a person could do is Google everything. Right? Because if you Google everything, you see every single piece of information. And again, whether it's true, not true, and often the result of that, no one ever said, you know what, I Googled my challenge and wow, I feel so much better. Right? It's incredible. Baruch Hashem, I got so much chizuk. Right? You don't get chizuk. Instead, what happens is you become filled with pachad and anxiety, and this one said this, you don't know what's true, what's not true. So it's not that ignorance is bliss, because Yiddishkeit does not believe in that. Ignorance is not bliss. But that sometimes, at least for a person to be able to move forward, not being face to face with the total reality of circumstances may actually be a little bit helpful. Again, an interesting yisod. So what happened? So what do? They moved the red string inside. Now it still didn't work. So people would still peer inside. They moved it to the inside of the ulam. People would still peer inside to be able to see the string. Helbin hayu smeichin. If it turned white, they were happy. Lo helbin hayu atzavin. Didn't turn white, they were sad. So what happened? V'adayin, I'm sorry. Hiskinu shikoshin osa chatzia b'sela v'chatzia ben karnam shel siyar mishlaya. So therefore they said, you know what? Take the string out of the Beis HaMikdash. And instead what they told the ish iti is tie one part of the string between the horns of the ram and one part of the string on the rock next to the edge of the cliff. So we'll say, amazingly enough, the only person who saw what happened to the string was who? The ish iti. And remember again, the ish iti doesn't get back until after Yom Kippur, right? So I don't know if he ever shared or if anybody ever asked him, you know what happens after Yom Kippur? After Yom Kippur, Baruch Hashem, there's such a sense of simcha. We've moved on, Emirat Hashem, to preparing for Sukkot. So I don't know that it even mattered as much to people what happened to that string. The point over here is that sometimes, again, it was an incredible yisod. Sometimes what you need people to be focused on is much more on what can be than what is. If I'm too focused on what is, that could totally take the wind out of my sails. So the string didn't turn red. It's the end of the road. We don't want people doing that. We want people being focused on what can be in the year ahead. Incredible yisod. Shabbosai. So therefore, again, the Gemara attributes that change of this tying of the red string, part on the goat and part on the rock, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Shabbos says in Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my Talmud Papa. Why did Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who holds that the ninth takana is the red string, why doesn't he hold like Rav Papa that it was Kerem Ravai? Amar Lachal, listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Chaver Rabbi Elazar Mihava. So remember again the story. Rabbi Eliezer had Kerem Ravai, had a lot of Kerem Ravai. And what did Rabbi Eliezer, what was he going to do? What? He was going to make it hefker. Why was he going to make it hefker? Right? Because remember again, he didn't want to have to carry to Yerushalayim. So the students, Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Rebbe, right, Chaveirav, your friends already repealed that decree. Rabbi will say, if indeed this was Tachan Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not a friend of Rabbi Eliezer, he was Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Hava, he was Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe. So Rabbi will say, so therefore again, the fact that the Talmidim said to Rabbi Eliezer, Rebbe, your friends, your colleagues already repealed this decree, seems to indicate that the person who repealed it was not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. V'idach. And what would Rav Papa respond to this? Kevan the Talmidim havu laf orech ara lememra le'Rabbi Rabach. And ultimately Rav Papa will say that no, this was said out of deference to Rabbi Eliezer. That since it was Rabbi Eliezer's Talmidim who were telling him that the decree was repealed, it's not respectful, apparently it's not respectful according to the Gemara, when speaking to your Rebbe, to tell your Rebbe that his Rebbe repealed the decree. I guess the Gemara felt it was a lack of kavod, that for the Talmidim of Rabbi Eliezer to say, oh Rebbe, your Rebbe already repealed the decree, was a lack of kavod, so therefore they phrased it, instead of saying your Rebbe, they phrased it as saying your colleagues. Why does Rav Papa, who says Kerem Ravai, why does he not agree with Rav Nachman, who says that it was the Lashon Shel Zahoris? Because if it was, is fascinating. If you think that it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who repealed the decree, now, which literally means Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the one who legislated, we're no longer hanging up the red string in the Beis Hamikdash, we're hanging up the red string in the desert, right on the goat and on the stump at the edge of the cliff. Listen to this. So the Gemara said, "Mei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mi havaloshen shel zahoris." In the days of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, there was no more red string. Why not? So the Gemara said, listen to this. V'atanya, this is incredible. Kol shnosa Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mea ve'esrim shana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived 120 years. Also, I'll just point out something very interesting. In the lens of Chazal, people who exhibited transformative leadership are always given 120-year lifespans. So again, whether it's literal or whether it's figurative, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, all of them are given 120 years. And here's what's amazing. Their 120 is almost always divided in the same way. 40 of nothingness, like just drain around. I guess finding themselves, they call it today. Right? 40 years. 40 years of learning, right? Personal growth, and then 40 years of leadership. It's an incredible thing, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is introduced to Klal Yisrael at the Sneh at 80 years old. Rabbi Akiva, ultimately again is an ignorant shepherd. First 40 years. Listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, what did he do? He wasn't ignorant. Mem shana asok b'pragmatia. This is incredible. He was in business. He was in business for 40 years. Mem shana lamad. 40 years. 40 years he learned. Mem shana limed. And 40 years he taught. So I'll say, isn't this incredible? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who literally, I've said this many times, and I believe it's really true. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saved Klal Yisrael in the aftermath of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He was the ranking sage, right? Who literally took the wheel and he steered Klal Yisrael out of existential danger. So amazing. 40 years he did business, 40 years he learned, and 40 years he taught. So the Gemara says, Vitanya, we learned, Mish Mem Shana Kodim Shnech Rabayis Lahayalosh Shal Zahoris Malbin, and we already learned that's what? For the 40 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the red string never turned white. That was already happening for 40 years. Ella Madim, it would remain red. Utnan, we learned, Mishecharav Habayis, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So remember again, it seems that Rabbi Yochanan's 40 years of teaching really only began when? After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. That's when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was on the scene, but his rise to prominence was really after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So if that's the case, he wasn't legislating about moving the red string outside of the Beis Hamikdash already. First of all, at that time already, when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, he wasn't really a posek yet. He wasn't the Rebbe yet. He was still learning. Number two, the string was remaining red the entire time anyway. To which the Gemara says something amazing. The idach, Rav Nachman will say, the idach osam arbaim shana delamad Talmud Yosef lifnei Rabba Haba v'amar milsa v'staber ta'amei v'kav'ei Rabbi b'shmei. And the other opinion will say, i.e. Rav Nachman Yitzchak will say, no, he actually legislated this in his 40 years of learning. During his 40 years of learning, he said this over. His Rebbe was very impressed with this approach and established this halacha in his name while he was still a student. Okay, so we'll say, so what comes out is we have 9 takanas of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, 8 of them, there's agreement on. The 9th one, there is machlokes. So we'll say, but it also teaches you something so incredibly amazing. If you look at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's life, you see such a model for successful living, right? 40, and by the way, the 40, those tekufos are not mutually exclusive, but you see the 40 years being engaged in business, how important it is to live a life of financial stability, right? Because where there is financial, not that money is the ends, but that financial stability allows a person to accomplish a lot of things in life and allows a person hopefully to not be overwhelmed by the financial obligations of life. 40 years of learning. You want to make a difference in this world, perfect yourself. See, all of us want to make a difference, but we often don't realize that for me to make the world a better place, I have to make me a better person. And then a tekufa in life where it's not just about my personal growth, because it's easy to fall into the trap of just it's all about my personal growth. No. What are you contributing? 40 years Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai becomes Rebbe. Because personal growth is very nice, but at a certain point in time, if it's only about my personal growth and I don't give back to anyone or anything around me, that becomes unfortunately a pursuit of selfishness. That becomes egocentricity. So the 40 years of business trying to establish some level of financial stability in life, the 40 years of working on yourself, representing the idea that to change the world, you have to become a better you, and the 40 years of contributing to those around you, representing if you just live life for you and just your nuclear family, without trying to impact those around you, unfortunately, that is a stunted existence. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Beautiful. We'll say Mishnah Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Say that we're supposed to go quickly. Say the brachos. Remember again, we're now back to the tefillas of Rosh Hashana. So the Mishnah is going to go into great depth regarding ultimately again how that tefillah is set up. So say the brachas Omer Avos Ugvuros Kedushas Hayom. Say the bracha of Avos, which is the bracha, right? Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yisrael, Elokei Yaakov. Then Gvuros Ato Gibar. The Olam Hashem Mechayim Nisim Ato Rav Lo Shia Mechalkel Chayim. Ukedushas Hashem. Kedushas Hashem is Ato Kadosh. Atakadosh. Now, boss, we're going to see this in Machlokes as to how to structure the Shmona Esrei of Rosh Hashana. V'kolel Malchios Imahen. Now, according to the first approach in the Mishnah, Malchios. Remember again, we've established, although we're going to go back and talk about this again today, that davening on Rosh Hashana is comprised of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros. So now the Gemara is going to say, where do you say Malchios? Mishnah says, you say Malchios in the section of Kedushas Hayom. Ve'eno Tokea. But you don't blow the shofar in Malchios. Kedushas Hayom. So the Gemara says Kedushas Hayom. Then you say Kedushas Hayom. Vitokea. And then you blow the shofar. Zichronos. Vitokea. You go and you blow the shofar in Zichronos. Shofros. Vitokea. And then Shofros you blow again. Va'omer Avoda. Vehoda. Obirchas Kohanim. Divrei Yochanan ben Nuri. Yochanan ben Nuri says, then you say Avoda. Ritzei. Hoda. Modim. Birchas Kohanim. Exactly as it sounds. Then Sim Shalom, and then you finish around. This, I will say, is the Shmona Esrei according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, Im ein lo tokeh lemalchius, lama hu maskir. So also, Rabbi Akiva is very intrigued, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's model, ultimately, again, you're not blowing shofar in Malchios. So Rabbi Akiva says, if you're not blowing shofar in Malchios, why are you even including it in Shmona Esrei? Now the Gemara is going to say, what does that mean? We'll get to that. Ella Omer, rather we'll say, here is Rabbi Akiva's model of Tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, which in fact is the model we adopt. Ella Omer Avos, Ugvuros, Ukidushas Hashem. Rather we'll say, what we do is you say Avos, first bracha, Gvuros, which ultimately ends with Magen Avraham, second bracha, Kidushas Hashem, the section of Ata Kadosh, V'kolel Mal, and then correct Ata Kadosh, and then again we end up Hamelech HaKadosh, V'kolel Malchios im Kidushas Hayom. And remember, Malchios is said with the section of Kidushas Hayom, Ata Kidashta. Right? So remember again, we have a section that seeks out the sanctity of Rosh Hashanah. Malchios is said as part of that section, Vitokea. And we blow shofar together with Malchios. So the Gemara says, Vitokea, Zichronos, then we say Zichronos, Vitokea. We say Zichronos, which we'll say, remember again, just to reiterate this, Malchus is a section that speaks about the monarchical identity of God. Zichronos speaks about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembers everything. We blow shofar as part of that. Shofros Vitokea. We say shofros, which speaks about the power of shofar. Past shofar, messianic shofar, Vitokea, and we blow. And then Va'omer Avoda, Vahoda, Ubirchas Konim. So both say, this is the model of Shemona Esrei of Rabbi Akiva, which is the model we accept to this very day. We say the bracha of Avos, we say the bracha of Gevuros, we say Kedushas Hashem Atakadosh, or we end Melech HaKadosh. Then, the section of Kedushas Hayom, speaking about the sanctity of the day. Included in that section is Malchios, shofar blowing for Malchios, Zichronos, shofar blowing for Zichronos, Shofros, shofar blowing with Shofros, then Ritzei, Modim, Berchas Kohanim, Sim Shalom, the end. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, Emeno Tehila Malchios Lamahu Maskir. So also Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yochanan Menuri, if you're not going to blow the shofar for Malchios, then why do you even bother to say Malchios? The Gemara says, what does that mean? Lamahu Maskir, Rachmana Ama Itkar. The Torah says you have to say Malchios. Now we'll say, we'll discuss exactly where the Torah says you have to say Malchios. What is Rabbi Akiva saying? So the Gemara says, no. What Rabbi Akiva meant to say was as follows. Elalama Eser. Both says we're going to see the setup is that we say 10 psukim each from Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. What Rabbi Akiva says is like this. If at the end of the day, we're not going to blow shofar by Malchios, then why should we say 10 psukim by Malchios? Namely, Leimatesha, just only say 9. After all, the whole of the Ishtani. Why don't we say that since Malchios is clearly different than Zichronos and Shofros, let it also be different in the number of psukim you have to say. To which the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, Minayin Sha'omrim Avos. So we'll say the Gemara is now going to go through the structure of Shemona Esrei very quickly in an effort to figure out why we say Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofar. So we have our fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and Rabbi Akiva as to the structure of Shemona Esrei on Rosh Hashana. We paskin like Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara goes weiter. Minayin Sha'omrim Avos. How do you know that in Shemona Esrei you begin with Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov? Shneimar Havu Hashem b'nei Elim. Literally, again, give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the sons of the great ones. The b'nei Elim over here is a reference to the Avos. As such, when we begin to give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shemona Esrei, we start Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. Nash Om Gvuros. How do you know that the next section in Shemona Esrei is Gvuros? Ata Gibor. We speak about the strength of Hashem. Shene'emar Havu Hashem Kavod Va'oz. Literally, again, give praise to Hashem about His strength. Uminayin she'omrim Kiddushos. How do you know that you say Ata Kadosh? How do you know that you have a section of Kiddusha? Shene'emar Havu Hashem Kivod Shemo Hishtachavu LaHashem Bahadras Kodesh. Literally, again, give praise to Hashem, glory to His name, bow down to Hashem in the glory of the Bahadras Kodesh, in the glory of His holiness. So we'll say, so remember again, we actually weren't so concerned with the beginning of Shemona Esrei. We're much more concerned with how we know Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, but that was just an intro to the discussion. So how do you know that we say Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros? So watch this. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dichsiv Shavason Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. So we'll say Rabbi Eliezer holds that we learn it out from the pasuk. Daber b'nei Yisrael leimor b'chodesh hashvi be'echel chodesh yelachem Shavason Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. So watch how the Gemara dissects this pasuk. Shabason Zeh Kedushas Hayom. So Shabason is the day of Shabbos. That refers to the sanctity of the day. Kedushas Hayom. Zichron, is it correct? Or Zikaron? No, sorry. Zichron, that refers to Zichronos. Trua, that's Shofros. Mikra Kodesh, Kadshehu Ba'asiyas Melacha. Mikra Kodesh means sanctify it, namely, don't do Malacha on the day. Amar Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, 1 second, Mipnei Malo Ne'emar Shavason Shavos Bo. Why not say that Shavason means what? That you have to go ahead and observe a Shabbos on that day, i.e. abstain from Malacha. So Pasach HaKosov Tchila. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Shavason Shavos Shebo Pasach HaKosov Tchila. Ela Shavason, rather Rabbi Akiva says like this. Shavason Kache Vasiyas Malacha. Means, don't do Malacha. Zichron Ela Zichronos. Trua Eila Shofros, Mikra Kodesh, Ze Kidushas Hayom. So we'll say, I want to show you something very interesting here, which is if you notice, when the Gemara asks, how do we know that we begin with Avos, and then Gevuros, and then go to Kedusha, that's proven through Psukim in Navi. Right, chapter 29, in Tehillim. Chapter 29 in Tehillim. If you notice when it comes to Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, what's fascinating about this is, it's proven from a pasuk. So we'll say, so remember again, all of this is rabbinic, right? Because understand, tefillah itself, the structure of tefillah as we have it, is midrabanan. But Chazal ultimately are trying to, it's an asmachta, they're trying to find a pasuk to support the structure. So it's just interesting to note that the structure for Rosh Hashanah comes from the pasuk of Rosh Hashanah, which is really quite beautiful. So the Gemara goes right there. The Gemara says, Minayin she'omrim Malchios. So how do you know that you say Malchios? So we'll say another approach. So that was the first approach. Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. All learned out from the pasuk I want to answer. Another approach. Minay shorim Malchios. How do you know that you say Malchios on Rosh Hashanah? Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. The pasuk says, I am Hashem your God. Ubachodesh Hashvi'i. And then right afterwards it says, on the seventh month. On the seventh month. So since those two phrases are juxtaposed, I am Hashem your God, on the first of the seventh month, which is Rosh Hashanah, we learn from there, Zum Malchios, that on the Rosh Hashanah you're supposed to declare Ani Hashem Elokeichem. That's Malchios. Rabbi Yossi Yehudah Omer Eino Tzarich. I don't need that limud. Charehu Omer V'haya Lochem L'Zikaron Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. The pasuk says it shall be for you a remembrance before Hashem your God. She'ein Talmud Lomar Ani Hashem Elokeichem. The pasuk doesn't need to say I am Hashem your God. Uma Talmud Lomar Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Why does it say Ani Hashem Elokeichem? Zeh bana av. So we'll say it creates a paradigm, a binyan av. L'chol makom shene'emar bo zichronos yihiyu malchios imoin. To teach us a paradigm which is wherever there is zichronos, wherever there is an element of remembrance, there's also always malchios. There's also always some reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's monarchical identity. Vehechan omra, and where do you say it? Where do you say malchios? Vehechan omra l'kedushas hayom. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, ima malchios omra. Mamatzina b'chol makom berevius. So Rabbi says like this. So remember again, where do you say vehechan omra l'kedushas hayom? Where should you insert kedusha? Because I will say, here's what's interesting about this discussion. I know the pieces that go into the Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah. Well, the machlokis is kind of where you put everything. So you've got Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, right? That we've established. You also have Kedushas Hayom, which is just the general bracha that speaks about the sanctity of the day. Where do you put Kedushas Hayom? So the Gemara says, Rebbe Omer ima Malchios Omra. Rebbe says we say Kedushas Hayom with Malchios. Why? Samamatzinu. Both say Samamatzinu, right? Because what have we found in every situation? B'chol makom berevius. Both say in general, the bracha of Kedushas Hayom in Shemona Esrei is usually what? The fourth bracha. Meaning, what that means is it comes after the first three. Right? I have the bracha of Avos, I have the bracha of Magen Avraham, I have the bracha of Mechayeh Mesim, and then in general, like just think about the Shabbos Shemona Esrei for just a moment, right? Then right after that you have Yismach Moshe, Tikanto Shabbos, Ato Kidashta, right? That's Kedushas Hayom. So Kedushas Hayom is the fourth bracha in Shemona Esrei. Afkan Berevius, so too over here on Rosh Hashanah, it should also be the fourth bracha. Reb Shimon Omer is said there, therefore say, what that does is, by the way, that puts it with Malchios. Right, that puts it with Malchios. Reb Shimon Omer, no, Ima Zichronos Omra. No, not true. You should say Kedushas Hayom with Zichronos. How so? Mamatzino b'chol makom be'emtza, because what's in general, Kedushas Hayom is in the middle of Shemona Esrei, so put it with Zichronos, so it'll be in the middle. Afkan be'emtza. Ukishikitshu Beis Din es Hashana b'usha. Also listen to this. Gemara now tells a story. When Beis Din established the new month in Usha. So we'll say, so remember again, who lived in Usha? This was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Remember again, in yesterday's daf we saw that the Sanhedrin moved where? How do we determine where the Sanhedrin moved? How do we determine? Wherever the Av Beis Din lived, right? They always followed the Av Beis Din. So remember that's from Yavne to Usha to Sharafam. So in Usha that was Rosh Shimon Gamliel. So listen to this. Kichikichu Beis Din Hashana b'Usha when the Sanhedrin declared the new month. This was Rosh Hashanah. In Usha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, here we go. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch went in front of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because you also remember again, that's why it's in Usha, because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the Nasi, he is the head of the Sanhedrin, and therefore the Sanhedrin followed him. So what happened? Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch went to daven for the Amid. Va'asa ki Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and he structured his Shmona Esrei like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in the Mishnah. Amalo Rabbi Shimon, lo hayuna again kain biyavne. This is not how we conducted ourselves in Yavne. Supposed to remember again, Reb Shimon Gamliel, remember the days in Yavne when the Beis Din was by his father, Rabbi Gamliel, right? And he said, that's not how we did things in Yavne, right? In Yavne, what he seems to be saying is, we daven Shmona Esrei now, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, but like Rabbi Akiva, the Yom HaSheni, Yarad Rabbi Chanina beno, the next day, well, it sounds like the next day, B'yom HaSheni, the next day, I should say on the second day, Rabbi Chanina, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, davened for the Amid, va'asa k'Rabbi Akiva, and he davened Shmona Esrei like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, kach haya noagin b'Yavne. This is how we did it in Yavne. So I'll say, very interesting. This might actually is very important because you see already earlier on, they'd adopted the version of Shmona Esrei for Rosh Hashanah like Rabbi Akiva and not like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So the Gemara says, the Memra, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva Svirle. So it seems to be clear that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel passed like Rabbi Akiva. Vaha, Rabbi Akiva, Malchius in Kedushas Hayom. But yet Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion, he said that the bracha of Malchius is said together with Kedushas Hayom. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kedushas Hayom Zechronos Amrlu. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was just quoted above as saying that ultimately, again, Kedushas Hayom is said with Zechronos. So what's going on over here? Rabbi Zera Lomar Shetokin Malchius. No. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel did not subscribe to the approach of Rabbi Akiva. But what he was saying was the final. Remember again, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, they did not blow the shofar with Malchius. Rabbi Akiva said, why are you not blowing the shofar with Malchius? When Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, in Yavne we pass like Rabbi Akiva, he wasn't referring to the structure of the Shmona Esrei. Rather, he was referring to what? That you should blow the shofar even during Malchius. So the Gemara says, Lomar shtokin la Malchius. Now the Gemara says, by the way, Liyom Hashini Yard Rabbi Chanina. So let's remember again in the story, it says on the second day, Rabbi Chanina, the son of Rabbi Yossi, davened for the Amid, and he conducted himself like Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, "My sheni." What do you mean the second day? Se'ilema Yom Tov Sheni. So we'll say, are you saying it's the second day of Rosh Hashanah? So we'll say, remember again, this story occurred before there was widespread acceptance of a second day of Rosh Hashanah. Lememra da'abruha le'elul. Is that to say then that they made Elul a 30-day month? So the Gemara says, "Rabbi Chanina bar Kahana mi'emos Ezra ve'elech lo matzinu Elul me'ubar." Yet we learn from the days of Ezra on, Elul was never a 30-day month. It was always a 29-day month. So why would they be observing a second day of Rosh Hashanah? To which the Gemara says, you're right, Amar Rav Chisda, my sheni liyom sheni l'shana haba. It means the next day, the next time Rosh Hashanah occurred, which was when? Next year. Right, so we'll say, so what happened that year, and ultimately again in the following year. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Rabbi Yossi, davened for the Amid, and he conducted himself like Rabbi Akiva. I will say, absolutely beautiful. So again, it's always very special to see that the Shmona Esrei that we daven is the Shmona Esrei of Rabbi Akiva, is the Shmona Esrei of Yavne, of in this case of Usha, incredibly and profoundly meaningful. Says the Mishnah, Ein pochsim me'asar malchios, me'asar zichronos, me'asar shofros. I will say, in the sections of malchios, zichronos, and shofros, we recite no less than 10 psukim per section. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer im Amar Gimel Mikulan Yatzar. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, if you said 3 of each, you're Yotzei. We'll discuss exactly what 3 of each actually means. Says the Gemara, Hani Yasar Malchios Kineged Mi. Why 10? Or why do you say 10 psukim at Malchios? Amar Rabbi Keneged Asara Hilulim Sha'amar David b'Sefer Tehillim, corresponding to the 10 Halalukas that David HaMelech said in Sefer Tehillim. Right? So what the Gemara is asking over here is, why 10? Why 10? The Gemara phrases it as why 10 Malchias. But what it means is, why 10? Why 10 psukim per section? Corresponding to the 10 halalukas that David HaMelech said in Tehillim. The Gemara says, 10 halalukas, hilulim tova hanach. Havu. There are much more than 10 halalukas in Sefer Tehillim. Rather, the Gemara says, Hanach tichsiv bohu halaluhu b'seika shofar. It was like corresponding ultimately again to the 10 halalukas, which reference tekiah or which reference shofar. Rav Yosef Amar. So corresponding to the 10 halalukas, which reference shofar, we adopt a model of 10 psukim per Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros section. Of Yosef Amar, Keneged Aseres Hadibros, Shnemru Lo Moshe Misinai. Both say this is beautiful. So Rav Yosef says, corresponding to the 10 Commandments. I will say, now what do the 10 Commandments have to do with Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros? Because I will say, what is the entire essence of Rosh Hashanah? The entire essence of Rosh Hashanah is to be inscribed in the book of life, is to be inscribed in the Sefer HaChaim, to be forgiven and to be given another year of life. If I want life, what do I need? I need Aseres Hadibros. If I want life, I need Torah. If I want life, ultimately I need to fulfill my spiritual obligations. So according to this approach, the very underpinning of Tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, corresponds to the Aseres Hadibros, Torah, and the observance of Torah, and the internalization of Torah is the key to success in life. So the Gemara goes like, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Keneged Asara Ma'amaros Sheba Nivra. It's very beautiful. Rabbi Yochanan says it corresponds to the 10 utterances. Right? We'll say when you go through Parshas Bereshis, you will find that there are 10 utterances, 10 times that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a statement of creation. So corresponding to the 10 utterances, we have 10 psukim in Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofar. So we'll say, what's the connection? Very simple, of course. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Haras Ha'olam. Rosh Hashanah is the day of creation. And therefore, again, we build in that creation motif with 10 psukim in each section corresponding to the 10 utterances of creation. So the Gemara says, 1 second, 10, Teshavu, there's only 9. Others will say, remember, what's an utterance? Vayomer Elokim. Anytime it's Vayomer Elokim, God said, Vayomer Elokim He are. That's a maimar, right? That's a statement. The Gemara says, go through the parsha. There's only 9. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Bereshis Nami Ma'amar. Very interesting. Bereshis itself, the word Bereshis Bara Elokim, that too is an utterance. That too is a statement of creation. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows: D'chsiv b'dvar Hashem shamayim na'asu. Because the pasuk says again, with the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the heavens were created. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar, Im Amar Shalosh Mikulan Yatsa. Right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, if you only said 3 of each, you are Yotze. So Ibai Lahu, Heichi Katani, Shalosh Min HaTorah, Shalosh Min HaNavim, Shalosh Min HaKsuvim, Davu Teisha, Ve'ike B'nei Echada, O Dilma Echad Min HaTorah, Ve'echad Min HaNavim, Ve'echad Min HaKsuvim, Dahavyalan Shalosh, Ve'ike Min HaTorah. So let's say, so remember again, what's happening in the Mishnah? So the Tanakama says, you need 10 psukim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying, no, you don't need 10. You only need 3 of Chumash, 3 of Navi, 3 of Ksuvim, and therefore their machlok is only about 1 pasuk. Or is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri saying, you only need 1 of Chumash, 1 of Navi, 1 of Ksuvim. You only need 3 psukim for each section, in which case their machlokes is much more significant. To which the Gemara says, Tashma, Tisanya in Pokus, Me'asar Malchios, Me'asar Zichronos, Me'asar Shofros. We learned in the Brisa, you can't say less than 10 psukim for Malchios, for Zichronos and Shofros. Vim Amar Sheva Mikulan Yatsa. But if you only said 7 psukim for each section, you're Yotze. Right? Why 7? Keneged Shiva Rakiyim, corresponding to the 7 levels of the Rakia. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, Hapoches lo yifchos misheva. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says you shouldn't say less than 7. V'ha'im amar shalosh mikulan. But if you said a total of 3 psukim for each bracha, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, if you only say 3 psukim for Malchios, 3 psukim for Zichronos, 3 psukim for Shofros, that works. Keneged Torah, Nevi'im, Uksuvim, corresponding to Torah, Nevi'im, Uksuvim. V'amrila keneged Kohanim, Levi'im, V'Yisraelim, Amr Avhuna, Amr Shmuel, Lach Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And I will say, that indeed is the halacha. That halacha l'maisa, what we have when you look in the Machzor is, we have 10 psukim. 10 psukim from Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. The way it works is 3 from Chumash, 3 from Navi, 3 from Ksuvim, and a concluding pasuk from Chumash. But bidi evet, if you only said 3 psukim, 1 from Chumash, one from Navi, one from Ksudim. Technically speaking, it works. Good. Mishnah. Ein maskirin zichron malchos shava shal paranos. Shabbosai, when choosing the psukim from Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, we do not choose any pasuk that makes a reference to punishment. Right? So in other words, in the psukim of Malchios and Zichronos and Shofros, we want them to be upbeat. So we do not talk about anything to do with punishment. Maschil b'Torah umashlim b'Navi. So we go ahead and we start with Torah, start with psukim of Torah, and we have psukim of Navi. Rabbi Yossi Omer hishlim b'Torah yatsa. Rabbi Yossi says, even if you conclude with psukim of Torah, you are yotze. Amud beis. Okay. Good. Malchios, Kigon, Ani Hashem, Nu'am Hashem, Shabbos Imlo Biyad Chazaka, Obezor Natuya, Obechema Shafucha, Emloch Alechem. Shabbos here again, he's quoting a pasuk from Yecheskel, and here the pasuk makes reference to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the king, but it talks about again anger. Va'afag Abdom Rab Nachman, Kol Ki Arischa, Lirsa Kuchabrichu Alon, V'lif And again, even though Rav Nachman said, let HaKadosh Baruch Hu get angry at us, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets angry at us and punishes us, we are purged through that divine anger and punishment. Kevan deberischa amar ad kuri rischa b'reisha salom ad karin. Rabbi say, we do not mention any psukim of anger on Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi say, this is incredibly important, because the truth is, this goes back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the removal of the red string. See, Chazal understood that the most important component to tshuva is a sense of hope and optimism. A person has to believe in themselves. A person has to believe in the power of change. A person has to believe in the ability that I can start over. And I will say, by the way, this is built into the concept of tshuva. That's why Chazal, even from a halachic perspective, try to make tshuva as easy as possible. Right? Takanas Hashav, we don't have time for it now, but we spoke about this before. So we'll say, isn't it incredible? So therefore the Gemara says, we don't want any psukim of divine wrath. No psukim. Because we'll say, think about this just a moment. Right? If Rosh Hashanah is shock and awe, which to a certain degree it is already, but if the psukim themselves also convey a sense of divine wrath, a sense of divine anger, the person's just going to give up. Person's going to say, I can't turn this around. And Chazal ultimately wants, so we'll say, isn't it incredible? And again, in general, by the way, such an important yesod in life. If you want to help facilitate change within another person, the way to do that is build them up, don't knock them down. No one has ever changed because they've been made to feel like a piece of garbage. Right? Instead, no one's ever been put down and says, you know what, that was really a good put down. That was a cathartic put down in my life. Right? Now that I feel like a doormat, a piece of garbage, now I'm really ready to try. That's not how people change. People change, right? We know this. We know this from our personal lives, from our professional lives, right? No one ever changes like that. When you build people up, you make them feel like they're capable. Okay, not ignoring their shortcomings. Isn't it incredible? Chazal said, no psukim of divine wrath. Zichron, Zichronos, Kigon. The Gemara is just giving examples of psukim of divine wrath. Zichron, Kigon, Vayiskar, Ki Basar Hema. So again, just giving different examples of psukim that highlight wrath that we're not going to use. Shofar, Kigon, Tiku, Shofar, Begiva. Avalim Ba, Lomar Malchios, Zichron, V'Shofar, Shal Paranos, Shal Ovdei Gochavim, Omer. If you want to use psukim, ultimately you're going to speak about divine wrath towards the nations of the world, in retribution for how they've mistreated Klal Yisrael, that you could include. Omer Malchus Kigon Hashem Malach Yirgizu Amim, O Kigon Hashem Malach Olam Vad Avdu Goyim Me'artzo, Zichron Kigon Zechar Hashem Ne Edom, Shofar Kigon V'Hashem Lakim B'Shofar Gadol Yitaka, V'Halach B'Saras Teimon Ksiv, Hashem Tzivakos Yagin Alev. So we'll say again, interestingly enough, if you want to include those psukim which highlight divine wrath against the Ummah Sa'olam, that's you're permitted to do. We'll say another incredible statement here. Eimas Kirin Zichron Shel Yachid Va'afilu L'Tova. I will say, in the section of Zichronos, just like we don't make any reference to any psukim of Zichronos, of divine remembrance, that have to do with wrath, we also don't use psukim of Zichronos that only reference the plight of the individual. The psukim of Zichronos ultimately, again, have to be focused on the collective. Kigon Zachrini Hashem Birtzon. So, quoting over here the pasuk from Tehillim. Zachrini Hashem Birtzon Amecha Pakdeni BiYeshuasecha. So we'll say because this remembrance is phrased in the singular, therefore halacha lemaisa we will not include it. So we'll say this is also very interesting because the truth is you wouldn't have thought this, right? I would have thought Dafka can use psukim of zichronos in the singular. Why? Because they will say, what is Rosh Hashanah all about? What is, right? Kol ba'ei olam over in the fun of. Come on, right? Kibnei marod, right? Kibnei marod. We'll say no more blank stares with this. Come on, this is not. This is interactive. This part, right? So we'll say so again. Kibnei marod. You have to chazer. You have to chazer. At least a good dapim. You have to chazer, right? We come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like sheep, one by one. So you would have thought that dafka, the individual psukim of zichronos could be. So we'll say, but once again, it's the same motif. The whole point of tefillah is to build confidence, and nothing builds confidence more than knowing you're not in it alone. You're part of the collective. We'll say that is the entire essence. Tshuva takes place when people feel confident, when people feel secure that they can turn it around. And one of the greatest security blankets of being a Yid is to know I am part of a collective. I am part of an Am. I am part of something bigger than myself. So that even if I don't have the requisite merits to carry the day, I could tap into the zechuyos of my people. So incredible. Upikdonos, hari kizichronos. And I will say, any lashon of pikadon, remembrance, is the same thing as zichronos. Kigon, v'Hashem pakar esara. Ukigon pakol pakar tieschem div Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehudah says, no. Einos kizichronos. No. For the psukim of zichronos, you can't use anything with pakad. It has to be zikaron. So Rabbi Yossi, nihinami dipikdonos, hari kizichronos. Even if you want to adopt the approach that pikadon is like zikaron, v'Hashem pakar esara, pikadon diyochu. How can you use v'Hashem pakar esara? V'Hashem pakar esara is what? Is an individual pasuk, talking about an individual. How can you use that? This is incredible. Kevan da'asu rabim minei kirabim damya. Since many people came from that remembrance, since many people came from that v'Hashem pakar esara, it is like a collective pasuk. Su'u shan rosheichem v'nasu pisilab. Excuse me. Thank you. Sushar Moshe Minasru Pisri Alam. Yavo Melech HaKavod. Mize Melech HaKavod Hashem Izuz V'Gibar Hashem Gibar Milchama. Sushar Moshechem Usu Pisri Alam. Yavo Melech HaKavod. Miuze Melech HaKavod Hashem Tzvakol Su Melech HaKavod Sela. Shabbos says, now watch this. What the Gemara is going to do is take that pasuk. Right, so remember again, that is Tehillim Parak Chav Dalid. So interesting enough, in that pasuk, you have a lot of references to God as King. So the Gemara is going to discuss essentially, if you use that pasuk in Shemona Esrei, how many remembrances can that count for? So the Gemara says, let's analyze the pasuk. So the Gemara says, Rishona Shtayim. Right, in the beginning, there are two mentions of, in the first pasuk, there are two mentions of kingship. Rishona Shtayim, Shnia Shalosh. In the second pasuk, ultimately again, there are three references to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's monarchical identity. So we'll say, in other words, it's possible that out of one pasuk, you can get 5 references to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's malchus. Different Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehudah no. Rishona Achos, the first pasuk only counts as 1. Shnia Shtayim, ultimately second pasuk counts as 2. Zamru Elokim Zameru, Zamru L'Malkinu Zameru, Ki Malach Kala Aretz Elokim. So we'll say again, the Gemara quotes again the pasuk from Tehillim. We'll say, remember again, we say these psukim right before Tikiyah Shofar. So the Gemara says, Shtayim Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, this counts as 2 utterances of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Yehudah Omer Achos. V'Shavyon, and they agree, Malach Elokim al Goyim, Elokim Yashav al Kisei Kadsho, Shehi Achos. That ultimately again, this only counts as 1. Zichron sheyesh bo trua, kigon shabason zichron trua mikra kodesh. So we'll say, listen to this. What happens now? We'll say again, we're just trying to figure out if there's the possibility of using one psukim to satisfy multiple psukim. In other words, if the goal is that you're supposed to say 10 psukim, right, which is supposed to have 10 psukim in each section, that reference HaKadosh Baruch Hu's monarchical identity, Malchias, Zichronos, Shofaros. So some of these psukim, which have multiple references to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Can they satisfy? Can they count as more than one utterance? Good, that's the machlokes. So the Gemara goes right there. What about zichron sheish bo trua? So listen to this. Let's say you have a pasuk that references the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembers, but it also mentions shofar. What do you do with the pasuk like that? Kigon shabason zichron trua. Like I will say, here you have the pasuk shabason zichron trua. So it says zichron, which is zichronos, and trua, which is shofros. Where would you put that pasuk in the Malchias? Well, in the zichronos shofaros section. So the Gemara says omra ima zichronos va'omra ima shofaros. Rabbi Yossi says you can use that pasuk wherever you want. You can put it wherever you want. You want to put it in zichronos, you want to put it in shofaros, wherever you want. Rabbi Yehudah Omer, no. Eino omra ella ima zichronos. Ultimately, again, he says that goes with zichronos, because ultimately, again, you can see the primary thrust of the pasuk is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ability to remember. Malchus sheish motrua. What happens if you have a pasuk that discusses God's monarchical identity together with shofar? Kigon Hashem Elokav imo utruas melech bo. So we'll say again, here you have a pasuk that references both Hashem Elokav imo. So right. So ultimately, again, the pasuk. I'm sorry. Now, right, quoting from the pasuk, Hashem Elokav utruas melech bo b'midbar. So we'll say, so what do you do with this pasuk? So Omra ima Malchus Omra Shofros Rabbi Yossi. He says once again, you can say it with Malchus or Shofros, because the pasuk makes reference to both God's monarchical identity as well as shofar. Rabbi Yehudah Omer Eino Omra ela im ha-Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah says no, you only say it with Malchus. Trua she'ini ma lo klum. What about a pasuk that just references shofar and nothing else? Kigon Yom Tirua Yihye Lochem. It'll be a day of trua for you. Omra ima shofar Rabbi Yossi. He says you say that with shofar. So Yehudah Omer Eino Omra kol ikar. Is that interesting? Yehudah holds that halacha l'maisa, a pasuk that just makes reference to shofar but doesn't tie into something else, you don't say at all. Good. Masli Torah mashlim benavi. Rabbi Yossi hishel b'Torah yatsa. So remember again, the Mishnah said you begin with psukim of Torah and you end with navi. Rabbi Yossi says if you want to end with a pasuk in Torah, that's okay as well. Im hishlim di eved and lechatchila lo. So also Rabbi Yossi sounds like he's saying bidi eved. If you want to end with a pasuk in Chumash, you can. So it sounds like b'di eved you can, but lachatchila you wouldn't. Is that true about Tanya we learned? Rabbi Yossi Omer hamash l'mator harezim meshubach. Rabbi Yossi said that if you end Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros with a pasuk from Chumash, that is praiseworthy. Ema mashlim. Rather, no. What it means is, so change it in Achinami that the Mishnah should say mashlim. That ultimately what Rabbi Yossi is saying is mashlim im Torah. That you should end the sections of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros with a pasuk from Chumash. Im hishlim katan. That's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says im hishlim. Im hishlim also means what? If you did it. If you did it sounds like what? So im hishlo katan diavad lechatchila lo. Halachik is what it means to say. Maschil Torah mashlam navi. So the Tanakhama says you begin the sections of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros with Torah, and you have psukim of Navi. Rabbi Yossi or mashlim baTorah. Rabbi Yossi says no. You should conclude the sections with a pasuk in Chumash. Ve'im hishlim benavi yatsa. What he means to say is if you ended up concluding with psukim of Navi, you're yotzei. You're yotzei. Taina, that supports this. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Vasikin, Hayu Mashlimin Osava Torah. The Vasikin. So the Vasikin, right? The early pious ones. They would go ahead and end Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros with a pasuk from Torah. Bishlama Zichronos, Vishofros, Ikatuva. So I'll say that's fine, because Zichronos and Shofros, there are plenty of psukim in the Torah that reference these ideas. Ela Malchios, Tzlasi Havyon. Ultimately, again, but by Malchios, there are really only 3 psukim in the Torah that reference HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a king. Right? Hashem Elokav imo truas melech bo, v'hi b'shura melech, Hashem yimloch li olam v'ed, v'anan ba'inon eser v'leka, Amar Rav Huna, Tashma. There are other psukim of Malchios. Listen to this. For example, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Malchus, Rabbi Yossi. Both say, so Rabbi Yossi holds the pasuk of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is a pasuk of Malchus. Now, what's unique about this? Even though the pasuk, of course, makes no reference to what? God is a melech. The stating that God is one, Rabbi Yossi understands, is a testament to his monarchical identity. Va'od anan ba'inan eser v'leka. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yehudah Omer, Eina Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah says, no. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is not a pasuk of Malchus. V'yadat hayom v'ashevosa el levavecha ki Hashem hua Elokim ein od Malchus Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that's a pasuk of Malchus. So also you see a theme. Rabbi Yossi holds that any pasuk which attests to the singularity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in and of itself a pasuk of Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah Omer Eina Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah says it's not Malchus. Because we'll say Rabbi Yehudah says the only pasuk that's a pasuk of Malchus is what? Is what? A pasuk that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a melech. I'm sorry. Eina Malchus. Ato Reis Saladas Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Od Milvado. Right? You have testified to, right? You have seen with your own, you have seen, and you have come to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the king. Ein Od Milvado. There is no one beside him. Malchus, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, that's a pasuk of Malchus. Again, we'll say, you see the theme. Any pasuk that testifies to the singular uniqueness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah Omer, Eina Malchus. Rabbi Yehudah says that halacha l'maisa, that is not a pasuk of Malchus. Good. But we'll say we'll have to stop over. So we'll say, a lot, Baruch Hashem. We're going to stop it there. We'll say we're going to start 5:45. We'll continue tomorrow and Friday, Emir Hashem. Shorter daf, Emir Hashem. We're going to cover some good ground. Today. We'll continue tomorrow. Shkoyach, everyone.
Yeah. I know.